Deputy Michael McNamara.
Thank you very much, look, I have to say this is one of the most depressing debates I've attended in this House, either in this term or in my previous term. On the one hand, we have the government saying everything is fine and listing out a whole lot of measures. I accept that all of those measures have been taken. Everything is not fine. They're not effective enough. A lot more needs to be done. Very clearly, I mean, we have a housing crisis. There's I suppose people are annoyed that the President pointed out the blindingly obvious. I suppose the emperors always get annoyed when somebody points out that they're naked. We don't have enough houses. Now, it's not just the fault of this government, clearly. There's a fault of governments going back right back to 2000 and before that, when there was a decision that the state didn't need to develop houses. So it's not necessarily the fault of this government that there aren't enough houses, but it will be the fault of this government if the next government faces a housing crisis, which it will unless we start developing houses now. On the other hand, Sinn Féin have one solution, it appears, and one solution only from the legislation tonight, and that's to stop private landlords serving notices to quit, even in circumstances where they want to move back into a house, even in circumstances where they let that house for a particular period of time, because of course the Residential Tenancies Act, it is unlawful to have time-limited tenancies, even for people who are moving abroad or moving to another part of the country and wish to let out their house while they're abroad, which I think is beneficial to society. We need to encourage people to let out houses rather than leave them empty, and the impact of an ongoing eviction ban, as it's called, because it's emotive, or an inability to serve notices of termination for such landlords is that they're not going to let out their houses. Instead of tinkering around the edges, which is what the Sinn Féin bill does with the Residential Tenancies Act, we need a fundamental reform of the Residential Tenancies Act. We need to acknowledge the fact that that act was brought in at a time when most landlords were Irish resident and were they may have owned numerous houses, but they were individual people. Now we have huge corporates moving in, buying whole developments, buying whole apartment blocks, and I think I have a couple of more minutes, thanks. Buying whole apartment blocks. And I mean, I think we need to differentiate between people who are letting out their house on a short-term basis, and it was always on a short-term basis, and need to move back in again, or even people who had enough money to buy an apartment so that their children could live in it when they went to college, so they're not going to have to commute from Clare to Dublin or Clare to Cork. I went to college in Cork. It simply would not have been possible to commute. I don't think it would have been particularly beneficial to anybody. So we do need to differentiate between them and huge real estate funds. And also, I do think that planning is a huge issue. Deputy Harkin and I put forward an amendment to the government motion that in the very short term, that planning not be required for either developments which are temporary housing developments or converting houses back into stock, which was something that the Minister did with regard to Ukrainians and can be done with regard to everybody else in need of housing. Thank you.